The Young and the Restless Spoilers, The Nightmare of Truth. Sharon's desperate plea for justice. The stillness of the night seemed almost oppressive as Sharon awoke with a jolt, her heart racing and her mind clouded with the vivid remnants of her dream. Or was it a dream? She wasn't sure anymore. The hypnotic trance she had been placed under had pulled her into an alternate realm of awareness, revealing something she had tried to suppress, the truth about Heather. The young woman's anguished cries for justice echoed in her ears, and Sharon could still see Heather's tear-streaked face in her mind. This wasn't just a random vision, it was a plea for vengeance. Heather had appeared, her spirit raw with pain, recounting the cruel end she and others had suffered. Her words had been seared into Sharon's memory. A couple, an older man and woman, they murdered us, Sharon. They trapped us, like they're trapping you now. Don't let them win. Don't let them get away with it. Help me make them pay. Sharon could feel the weight of Heather's grief, her desperate need for resolution. But how could Sharon bring this truth to light? How could she convince anyone, let alone the people she trusted, to believe such a fantastical story? The weight of skepticism. Sharon's first instinct was to confide in Nick, her closest confidant and the man she hoped would understand her plight. But the conversation fell apart before it even began. Nick dismissed her claims as stress-induced delusions, the result of trauma and manipulation by Ian Ward. His voice was steady, but his words cut deep. Sharon, you've been through so much. Maybe this is your mind's way of trying to make sense of it all. But you can't seriously believe in vengeful spirits. Sharon's protests were met with silence. How could she explain what she had seen, what she had felt, when there was no evidence to back her claims? Ian Ward's shadow loomed over her like a cloud, and the public perception of him, and by extension, her, was already darkened by accusations of manipulation and violence. The idea of presenting a supernatural encounter as proof of Ian and Jordan's crimes seemed preposterous, even to herself. But Sharon knew in her soul that Heather's appearance wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was a call to action, one she couldn't ignore. Heather had died unjustly, and her spirit was demanding justice. Chance and Michael, a glimmer of hope. While Nick's disbelief stung, not everyone was quick to dismiss Sharon's claims. Chance Chancellor and Michael Baldwin, both seasoned investigators with sharp instincts, listened carefully as Sharon recounted her vision. To her surprise, they didn't scoff or dismiss her outright. Instead, they exchanged knowing glances, as if recognizing that the strange and inexplicable were often just another facet of life in Genoa City. You're saying Heather mentioned a couple? Chance asked, his tone thoughtful. An older man and woman? That's oddly specific. It's not exactly the kind of thing you'd just dream up. Michael nodded in agreement. And if what you're saying is true, Sharon, then Heather's death, and everything else tied to Ian Ward, could have been part of a much bigger scheme. If we can link Ian and this couple, we might just have a lead worth following. The two men promised to investigate further, though they cautioned Sharon to tread carefully. Without concrete evidence, her claims would remain little more than speculation. But their willingness to believe her, even in part, gave Sharon a sliver of hope. Maybe she wasn't alone in this fight after all. The mystery of Jordan. Meanwhile, another troubling question began to surface. Where was Jordan? The last anyone had heard, Jordan was supposed to be locked away, serving time for her past crimes. Yet, if Sharon's vision was accurate, and if Heather's ghostly accusations held any weight, then Jordan was somehow free and involved in the sinister web of deceit and murder orchestrated by Ian Ward. Chance and Michael began digging into Jordan's supposed incarceration, only to uncover an alarming lack of records. There was no indication that Jordan had been released, but there were also strange gaps in her prison documentation. Transfers that didn't add up, inconsistencies in visitation logs, and, most notably, a conspicuous silence from the prison administration itself. It's like she vanished into thin air, Michael muttered, poring over the files in his office. Someone's covering their tracks, and they're doing a damn good job of it. Chance frowned, leaning over the papers. Or she had help. If Ian Ward is as powerful and resourceful as we think, he could have orchestrated her escape. That would explain why no one seems to know where she is now. The more they uncovered, the more questions arose. If Jordan had escaped prison, where was she hiding? And why had no one noticed her absence until now? The lack of answers only deepened the mystery, fueling suspicions that Jordan and Ian were operating together, perhaps as the very couple Heather had described. The hunt for truth. As Chance and Michael worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, Sharon found herself increasingly isolated. Her visions of Heather grew more vivid, more urgent, as if the young woman's spirit was growing impatient. Heather's words haunted Sharon, "They'll never stop. Not until someone stops them." Sharon began piecing together her own fragmented memories, trying to make sense of the connections. Ian Ward had always been a master manipulator, but his motives were rarely personal. He thrived on chaos and control, using people as pawns to further his mysterious agenda. Jordan, on the other hand, had a deeply personal vendetta against Victor Newman, and her actions were often driven by a thirst for revenge. Together, they were a dangerous combination. A calculated mastermind and a volatile avenger. But why Genoa City? And why now? Sharon suspected that their return wasn't coincidental. There was a larger plan at play, one that likely involved not just her, but others in the city as well. Building a case despite Nick's doubts, Sharon couldn't afford to wait for others to take action. She began documenting everything she could remember from her visions and her encounters with Ian and Jordan. Every detail, no matter how small, became a piece of the puzzle. Chance and Michael, meanwhile, followed their own leads. They tracked down former associates of Ian Ward, hoping to find someone willing to talk. They also delved into the city's surveillance networks, searching for any sign of Jordan. It was a painstaking process, but both men were determined to bring the truth to light. And then, a breakthrough, a grainy security camera image from a convenience store on the outskirts of Genoa City, showing a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Jordan. She was wearing a hooded jacket, her face partially obscured, but the timestamp on the footage placed her in the city within the past week. "It's not much," Chance admitted, showing the image to Sharon, "but it's a start. If she's here, we'll find her." A race against time. The discovery of Jordan's presence in Genoa City only heightened the urgency of their investigation. Sharon knew that Ian and Jordan wouldn't sit idly by while their secrets were uncovered. They were dangerous, and if cornered, they wouldn't hesitate to strike. For Sharon, the stakes couldn't have been higher. She wasn't just fighting to clear her name or to prove Heather's death wasn't in vain. She was fighting for her own survival, and for the chance to finally bring justice to the victims of Ian and Jordan's twisted schemes. But time was running out, and the clock was ticking. Sharon could only hope that Chance and Michael's determination, and her own unwavering belief in the truth, would be enough to unravel the mystery before it was too late. Alan's unwavering conviction and Heather's final message. Inside the quiet halls of Memorial Hospital, Alan sat across from Nick, his posture steady and his gaze sincere. Alan was a respected physician, a doctor and researcher whose credentials were beyond reproach. He spoke with a measured calm, as though gently guiding Nick through a truth as delicate as glass. The fluorescent lighting hummed softly overhead, and beyond the door, the muffled rhythms of medical machinery created an odd sense of accompaniment to their conversation. Alan's voice was calm but firm, each word polished by careful thought. "Nick, you must understand that what Sharon has seen is not mere fantasy. When a person slips into a coma, their brain doesn't simply drift off into nonsense. According to my research and what I have come to firmly believe, the mind plunges into a realm of memory, lost fragments, hidden truths, details we once knew but forgot. These visions can be startlingly vivid and accurate. They're not random dreams, but old chapters of our lives replayed in perfect clarity." He could see skepticism crease Nick's forehead, but Alan continued, knowing he had to make Nick trust Sharon's experiences. "I wouldn't expect you to take my word for it if I were a novice, but I've spent decades working with patients who have awakened from comas with extraordinary recollections. They remember old conversations, hidden secrets, events that happened behind closed doors. A doctor like me doesn't say these things lightly, and I wouldn't deceive you now. What Sharon has told you might sound impossible, but the human mind stores truths that surface at unexpected times. Nick ran a hand over his face, struggling to reconcile Alan's words with his own instincts. On the one hand, Sharon's claims seemed outlandish, memories conjured from a state of unconsciousness, revelations whispered by spirits and victims from the past. On the other, Alan's reputation as a brilliant physician was beyond dispute. He had no reason to lie, no motive to lead Nick astray. His earnestness filled the room, pressing gently against Nick's doubt. "She needs you to believe in her," Alan said, softer now. "Sharon is fighting to prove her innocence, to prove that what she's seen and experienced has substance. She's a sensitive person, Nick, easily hurt by suspicion and silence. All her life, Sharon has yearned for stability, for a family's unconditional love and support. Right now, she needs you, more than anyone else, to give her the strength to stand by the truth. Without your trust, she stands on fragile ground, left to weather an impossible storm alone." Nick's heart tightened. He knew Sharon well, knew her compassion, her vulnerability, and her honest desire to protect those she loved. If Sharon had risked embarrassment, disbelief, and isolation just to share these revelations, then perhaps there truly was something worth believing in. He swallowed hard, the memory of Sharon's tearful eyes and trembling voice lingering in his mind. Alan leaned forward, as if to bridge the emotional distance between them. "Think about what this means, Nick. Sharon's visions are pieces of a larger puzzle. If her recollections point to Ian Ward, Jordan, and others lurking in the shadows, wouldn't it be wise to at least consider them? Don't dismiss her because the story sounds strange. The truth often does." Nick nodded reluctantly, his resolve beginning to crack. "I don't want to doubt her," he said quietly. "Sharon deserves to be heard. This is all so hard to accept." "You don't have to understand it fully yet," Alan reassured him. "Just give her the benefit of the doubt. Stand beside her, let her know she's not alone." Outside the small office, Sharon paced the corridor. She was afraid that Alan's attempt would fail, that Nick would continue to see her claims as nothing more than the wild imaginings of a troubled mind. She hugged herself, willing away the insecurities that threatened to consume her. If Nick refused to believe her, where else could she turn? But Sharon also carried within her another burden, the final request of Heather, the young woman whose death still lingered as an unhealed wound in the fabric of their reality. While under the hypnotic trance, Sharon had seen Heather's spirit and listened to her tearful pleas. Heather had one final message, one last request that refused to fade even after Sharon woke. When Nick finally emerged from the consultation with Alan, Sharon took a tentative step forward. She could sense a subtle shift in his demeanor. His eyes, once filled with disbelief, now bore a hint of reluctant acceptance, a softness that suggested he'd given Alan's words some consideration. "Sharon," Nick said, voice low. "Alan and I talked. I'm trying to understand. I don't know if I do, not completely, but I'm trying." Sharon's shoulders sagged in relief. For her, having Nick's ear was everything. She reached out and took his hand, grateful that he hadn't turned away. "That's all I'm asking," she said softly, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "Just give me a chance to show you I'm telling the truth." Nick nodded, and Sharon felt a renewed sense of hope rising in her chest. Now that he would at least listen, she could share Heather's request. They walked over to a quiet corner, away from the steady thrum of hospital life. Sharon took a deep breath before speaking. "While I was under that spell, that trance," she began carefully, "I saw Heather. Her spirit. She was crying and telling me about what happened to her. And she left a message for Daniel and Lucy." Nick's eyes widened at the mention of Heather's spirit, and Sharon felt her heart flutter anxiously. But he didn't pull away or scoff. Instead, he tightened his grip on her hand, allowing her to continue. "She wants them to know that even though she's gone, they shouldn't worry," Sharon said, voice quavering slightly. "She remembers them, loves them. She says death hasn't erased that bond. Heather wanted me to say that no matter what happened, she carries their memory with her." A profound sadness washed over Nick's features. He thought about Daniel and Lucy, about how hard it would be for them to learn that Heather, someone they cared about, had met such a tragic end. If Heather's final words could bring them even a small measure of comfort, then maybe, in some small way, good could still emerge from the pain. Sharon's voice was barely above a whisper as she finished. "I know it's hard to believe. But I heard her, Nick. I saw her. And I know it was real." He exhaled slowly, scanning Sharon's face. She wasn't lying, he could see it in her eyes. Pain, honesty, hope, they were all there, unmasked and vulnerable. If Alan, a seasoned doctor, believed in the authenticity of coma recollections, and if Sharon stood here so certain, then maybe it was time to open his mind to possibilities he'd never considered before. "All right," he said gently, reaching up to brush a stray tear from Sharon's cheek. "I'll help. I'll stand by you, Sharon, and we'll figure this out together. We'll find the truth behind Heather's death, and we'll make sure her message reaches Daniel and Lucy." Sharon closed her eyes, relief and gratitude flooding her. She had Nick's support, the first crucial step toward unraveling the mystery. With Alan's professional endorsement and Nick's empathy, she no longer felt like she was battling the unknown alone. Together, they would seek answers and bring justice to the wronged, honoring Heather's final wish in the process. In the corridor's hush, a subtle current of hope flowed between them, weaving together the trust, understanding, and compassion that Sharon so desperately needed. Now, bolstered by belief and guided by an unexpected ally in Alan, they would venture deeper into the hidden truths of Genoa City, determined to ensure that no soul, living or departed, would be ignored or forgotten.